am not trying to run away with a man. I am trying to get away from you.
My sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're all here because we love you." And I thought, someone is lying in this room. I just didn't know yet how many people it was. Let me tell you exactly how I got to that moment. Because it didn't start with an intervention. It didn't start with Elias. It didn't even start with my sister, though she'll be central to everything that follows. It started with a green armchair. My mother had owned that armchair for 11 years. Green velvet, slightly worn on the left armrest, positioned in the corner of our living room, the way a lighthouse sits on a cliff. Fixed, permanent, not a thing you move. I had grown up around that armchair. I had done homework beside it, eaten beside it, fallen asleep watching television while my mother sat in it. When I walked into the living room that Thursday evening, the armchair had been moved, positioned directly across from the sofa, facing it, like a throne set up for a cross-examination. I noticed this before I noticed the people, and then I noticed the people. My mother, my father, my older sister Samira, 2 relatives I hadn't seen in 8 months, few family friends whose opinions I had never once requested, and Maya, my best friend of 6 years, the woman who had sat with me on my worst nights, the woman who knew every private and embarrassing and painful thing about me, sitting in my family's living room, holding a mug of tea she hadn't touched, staring at the floor like it had personally wronged her. Nobody was smiling. My mother's eyes were already red. My father was looking at the window. Samira stood up when I walked in. She was using her careful voice. I knew that voice. It was the voice she used when she had been preparing something for days and needed it to land exactly right. "Nadia," she said, "we're all here because we love you." I looked at Maya. Maya looked at the floor. I set my bag down very slowly. I thought several things in rapid succession. I thought, someone arranged this. I thought, they moved the armchair so I'd have to sit facing all of them. I thought, how long has Maya known about this? I thought, how did 4 years of a relationship become a family emergency without me noticing it building? Then Samira said the thing she'd clearly been rehearsing. "We think you need to leave, Elias." And I stood there, in my own family's living room, surrounded by people who loved me, and felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. If you're new here, welcome to Afro Storyverse. Subscribe now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that like button, because this story is going to take you somewhere you did not expect. Let me go back 4 years, because that's where this actually begins. I was 27 years old, in my first year of postgraduate architecture school, surviving on bad coffee and deadline anxiety, when I met Elias at a study group I had attended specifically because someone told me there would be decent food there. There was not decent food. There was, however, Elias. He was 29, cybersecurity engineer, the kind of person who color-codes his files and alphabetizes things without being asked and notices immediately when something has been moved. I know he notices because I tested it within the first 20 minutes of meeting him. He had arranged his notes in a very particular order on the table. I moved one folder approximately 4 inches to the left while he was getting water. He came back, looked at the table, looked at me. "You moved that." "Did I?" 4 inches. Left. That's very specific. That's very suspicious. I smiled. I couldn't help it. He was looking at me with this expression that was half irritated and half genuinely curious, like he hadn't decided yet whether I was a problem or an interesting development. "I was testing something," I said. "What were you testing?" "Whether you'd notice." "And?" "You passed," I said. He picked up his folder, put it back in its original position with absolute precision, and sat down. Then, after a moment, he looked at me again. "What happens to people who fail?" he said. "I don't keep them around long enough to find out." He laughed. And that was it. That was the beginning of everything. 3 weeks after that, I had a terrible week. The kind of terrible that doesn't have one specific cause. It's just an accumulation of small exhaustions that press down on you all at once. A deadline I nearly missed, a disagreement with a professor, a phone call home that left me feeling simultaneously guilty and resentful, and confused about why I felt both at the same time. I mentioned it to Elias once, briefly. I wasn't looking for a response. I was just talking, filling silence, and he was there. The next day, he left something on my desk. A book. Terrible cover. The title was something like Great Architectural Failures of the 20th Century. There was a sticky note on it that said, "Thought you might like knowing other people's buildings have also collapsed." He didn't make a thing of it. He didn't wait for my reaction. He just left it there and went back to whatever he was doing. I sat with that book for a full minute. And then I thought, I am going to fall in love with this person, and it is going to rearrange everything. I was right about both. Maya's reaction when I told her about him was immediate and definitive. "He color codes his files," she said. "Yes. And noticed when you moved one. Within 30 seconds. She pointed at me, very seriously. The way she pointed at things she had strong feelings about. "Marry him. Maya. I'm not joking. A man who pays attention. Do you know how rare that is? My last boyfriend didn't notice when I cut off 8 inches of hair. 8 inches, Nadia. We were sitting across from each other at dinner, and he said, 'Did you do something different?' I laughed until I couldn't breathe. That was Maya. She had a way of saying exactly the absurd and perfect thing at exactly the right moment. She had been doing it for 6 years. She was the first person I called when anything happened, good or bad, because she could make even the bad things feel like something you'd eventually be able to tell as a story. Which is why what she did later nearly broke something in me that I didn't know could break. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My family met Elias at a dinner that my mother organized, with the energy of someone hosting a diplomatic summit. She cooked 3 dishes. She ironed the tablecloth. She told my younger cousins to be on their best behavior twice. Elias was polite. He said the right things. He helped clear the table without being asked, which I knew my mother noticed because she noticed everything. He spoke to my father about something. I couldn't hear the conversation from where I was standing, but my father nodded twice, which was as close to approval as he gave most people on a first meeting. I thought it went well. Then Samira cornered me in the kitchen while we were doing dishes. "He seems nice," she said. "He is nice." She handed me a plate. "I just don't think he's right for you." I stopped drying. "You met him 2 hours ago." "I know, but I can tell." "Can you?" "Nadia." She used my name the way older siblings use your name, not as a form of address, but as a reminder that they have been alive longer than you and believe this confers some form of authority. I'm not saying I hate him. I'm saying I'm not sure about him. Not sure about what specifically? She paused, kept washing the dish in her hands. I can't explain it. Try. It's just a feeling. I looked at her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the dish, scrubbing it with more focus than a dish required. I filed that moment away. What I didn't know then, what I only understood much, much later, was that Samira had looked at Elias across that dinner table with an expression I couldn't read. I'd noticed it and thought it was disapproval. I was wrong about what it was. I was wrong about almost everything I thought I understood about my sister during those years, and that wrongness cost me 2 years of my life that I will never get back. But understanding comes when it comes. You can't rush it. The pressure started slowly. My mother began asking where I was going whenever I left the house. Not in a casual way, in a tracking way. What time would I be back? Who would I be with? Why was I seeing Elias on a Tuesday? Wasn't I busy with university? Shouldn't I be focused? I was focused. I was doing postgraduate architecture. I was also working part-time. I was also helping around the house. I was also maintaining a relationship. I was also trying to sleep occasionally, with limited success. My life during that period was a scheduling problem that I was only barely solving, and the last thing I needed was to add a monitoring system on top of it. One night I came home at 10:30. I had been at university. My model had collapsed twice, and I'd had to rebuild it, and my professor had given feedback that was technically constructive and emotionally devastating, and I had taken the late bus home because I couldn't afford a car yet, and I was exhausted in the particular way that architecture students are exhausted, bone deep, design haunted, slightly delirious. My mother was in the living room. "Where were you?" she said. I set my bag down, took off my shoes, considered, briefly, the option of lying. "University," I said. "Until 10:30. The building didn't care." "You should have called." "I did call. I texted at 9. My phone died." "Then you should have found a phone." I looked at my mother. She was genuinely worried. She was also genuinely monitoring me, like I was a parcel that might get lost in transit. Both things were true simultaneously, and I had no idea what to do with the combination. "Mama," I said, "I have a master's thesis, 3 studio deadlines, a professor who schedules critiques on Saturday mornings for what I'm increasingly convinced are spiritual reasons. I promise you, the most dangerous thing in my life right now is load-bearing calculations." She handed me food. That was how most of our arguments ended. In food. It was the only peace treaty we both knew how to offer. About 3 months into this pattern, my father stopped speaking to me properly. Not silence, exactly. He would ask if I'd eaten. He would say goodnight. Functional sentences. Information exchange. But the way a father talks to a daughter, he's actually glad to see. That stopped. I didn't know what had shifted. Then a family acquaintance proposed marriage. He was 34, recently returned from working abroad, and someone my parents knew through a cousin. I had met him once at a gathering. He had opinions about traffic and not much else. I said no. The house became a different place after that. My mother cried for 2 days. Not about the man. She didn't particularly know him either. About what it meant that I had said no. About what it suggested about where my mind was. About Elias. My father's silence deepened from coolness into something I can only describe as deliberate absence. He was in the house, but he had removed himself from me. And then one evening, I was getting water from the kitchen. The kitchen shares a wall with the hallway. I wasn't eavesdropping. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I was getting water. I heard Samira's voice. Low, careful. She was on the phone. "She won't listen. You know how she is." I stood very still. "I know. I'm trying. But we need to be careful about how we do this." A pause. "She can't find out we talked." I didn't move until I heard her hang up. I went back to my room. I did not ask her about it. That was my first mistake. I kept telling myself it was nothing. People have private conversations. Samira might have been talking about anything. I told myself this for weeks, which is to say I told myself a comfortable lie until the truth was large enough that I couldn't. In the meantime, my life got harder. I started leaving earlier in the morning to avoid the questions. I started coming home later, which created more questions. I started spending more time with Elias, not running toward him exactly, more that he was the only place in my life where I wasn't being monitored or managed or made to feel that my choices were a form of harm I was doing to other people. With Elias, I could breathe. But I wasn't telling him how bad it had gotten. I know that now. I was protecting him from the weight of it, or protecting myself from having to say it out loud, or both. I genuinely couldn't tell the difference. He'd ask how things were at home and I'd say fine, and he'd look at me in that way he had, the way that meant he knew fine didn't mean fine, and he'd say, "You know you can tell me things." And I'd say, "I know." And he'd say, "Do you actually know? Or are you just saying it? And I would not answer immediately. That pause, that single pause, became part of the evidence against me later. I'll explain that in a moment. Keep watching. The locker came next. I want to tell you about the locker, because people who read this will probably have opinions about it, and I want to get ahead of those opinions. I opened a storage locker at the university, and I began quietly moving things into it. Important things. My passport. Documents. My backup hard drive. A change of clothes. The small framed photo of my grandmother that I'd had since I was 12. Things that were mine, and that I wanted to be sure would remain mine regardless of what happened. People will read that and think I was planning to leave. That I had already decided and was just waiting for the right moment. That's not what it was. I had watched, my entire life, what happened to women who needed to leave a situation quickly and had nothing ready. My aunt. A woman from my mother's circle, whose name I'll leave out. A girl from my undergraduate program who had to go back somewhere she didn't want to be because she had no document, no money, no evidence that her life was actually hers. I was not planning to leave. I was planning for the possibility that I might have to. If you are a woman reading this, you understand the difference between those two things without me explaining it further. If you're not, please trust me that the difference is real, and that the fact that I knew the difference at 27 was not a sign of instability. It was a sign that I had been paying attention. I told Elias none of this. He knew something was wrong. He could always tell. That was one of the things that was both wonderful and slightly unnerving about him. He picked up on shifts that other people missed entirely. "You seem like you're carrying something," he said one evening. "I'm fine. I know what fine sounds like from you. That wasn't it. Elias. I'm not pushing. I'm just saying I'm here. I know you're here." "Do you?" I looked at him. He was looking at me the way he looked at problems he was genuinely trying to solve. Not trying to win, just trying to understand. "Yes," I said. But I kept the locker to myself. Then I got the internship. Architecture firm, another city, 4-month placement, the kind of opportunity that my program director told me I should take without hesitation. It was a significant firm, serious work, the kind of experience that would matter for the rest of my career. I said yes before I finished reading the offer. My parents' initial reaction was approval. My father actually said something positive, briefly, but still. My mother started researching accommodation options. Then they found out Elias lived in that city. Not near that city, in it. He'd taken a position there 7 months earlier, and we had been managing long distance badly, which is to say, we had been managing long distance the way most people manage it, with video calls and weekend visits, and the particular exhaustion of loving someone across a distance. When my family discovered this, the approval evaporated. My mother called it orchestrated. She said I had engineered the internship to follow a man, that I had manipulated the opportunity to disguise what I was really doing. That this wasn't a career move, it was an escape, and everyone could see it except me. I had not orchestrated anything. The internship was real. My director had recommended me. The offer had arrived in my university email. I had the paper trail to prove it. But the story my family had already written about me was one in which I was a woman being led astray, and evidence to the contrary was not something they were in the market for. I lost my composure. I want to be honest about that. I had been patient for months, answering questions I shouldn't have had to answer, justifying decisions I had the right to make without justification, absorbing silence and tears and disappointment, as though they were things I had caused, rather than things that were being aimed at me. I lost it. "I am not trying to run away with a man," I said. The room was very quiet. "I am trying to get away from you." That was the moment. That sentence. Not the one I'm most proud of. Not because it wasn't true, but because I delivered it as a weapon when I was actually trying to say something more complicated and more honest. What I meant was, I am suffocating. What came out was an accusation. My father stood up. He was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to speak. Then he did. "Then leave," he said. His voice was completely even. That was worse than if he'd shouted. "If you walk out of this house for him, don't come back." A pause. "You are no longer my daughter." I have replayed that sentence so many times that it has lost its original shape. It sounds different every time I hear it in my memory. Sometimes it sounds like rage. Sometimes it sounds like grief. Sometimes, and this is the version that costs me the most, it sounds like he believed it would stop me, like he was certain I loved him enough to back down. He was right about the love. He was wrong about what it required. I went to my room. I waited 3 days. On the 4th day, a Thursday, while my parents were out and Samira was at work, I packed what I needed from my room, collected what I had stored in the locker, called a car, and left. I left my house key on the kitchen table. I don't know why I did that. It wasn't planned. It just felt honest. Like, I understand what this means. Like I'm not sneaking. I'm going. The car arrived. I put my bags in. I sat in the back seat. My street got smaller in the rear window. My phone started ringing when I was 3 blocks away. It didn't stop for 4 days. Among the messages I received in the first 48 hours, 17 missed calls from my mother, a voice note from my aunt that was 9 minutes long, which I did not listen to, a text from a family friend I hadn't spoken to in 2 years that said, "Your mother is devastated. You should be ashamed." Several relatives with variations on the theme of, "You've destroyed this family." From Samira, nothing. No call. No text. No voice note. Nothing. Everyone else was loud. Samira was completely silent. I noticed that. I filed it. If you're still here, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed to Afro Storyverse yet, do it right now, because this story is about to go somewhere you did not see coming. My new city was smaller than home, in a way that felt deliberate, like it had been designed with the specific intention of being manageable. I found a flat, small but mine, a desk by the window where I could see a tree that changed color across the months I lived there, a kitchen where I was solely responsible for what got cooked, which was occasionally a disaster, but was my disaster entirely. I started the internship. I was good at it. I had always been good at the work. That had never been in question. What the internship gave me, beyond the professional experience, was the daily reminder that I had built real skills in the years I'd spent being told I was making bad decisions. I worked. I submitted my thesis chapters. I walked when I needed to think, which I did constantly. I learned things about myself that years of being monitored had not left space for. That I am a morning person, genuinely, something I hadn't known because mornings at home were loud and expectant, and the only way to avoid them had been to sleep through them. Alone, I woke early and sat in the quiet and drank coffee while the city was still deciding to begin. It was the first time in my adult life that the morning belonged entirely to me. I know that sounds small. It wasn't small. Elias and I found our rhythm. He knew the shape of my stubbornness by then, the way I processed things internally before I could talk about them, the way I said fine when I meant I'm struggling but haven't organized my thoughts yet. He had learned not to push. He had learned to leave space open and trust that I'd walk into it eventually. He cooked. I attempted to cook. One Tuesday evening, I had made what I had decided was a creative interpretation of a recipe I'd seen online, and what I had actually made was something that defeated the pan. He stood in my kitchen looking at what remained. "What happened?" he said. I adjusted the recipe. To include fire. The original was too straightforward. He picked up the pan, looked at it from several angles, with the expression of someone performing a small and respectful funeral, set it carefully in the sink. "I'll cook," he said. I was getting there. When? After the fire alarm filed a formal complaint. We ate takeout. Later, he was pretending to read, but actually watching me, in the way he did when he thought I was somewhere in my head. "I was washing up," he said, from the couch. "You seem lighter." I thought about it. "I am," I said. "I think I've been very heavy for a long time, and I didn't know how heavy until I put it down." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. But things were not entirely smooth. I want to be honest about that, because the story I'm telling you is a true one, and the true version includes the parts where I was difficult. Elias said to me once, during a harder week, "You need to stop caring what your family thinks." Just like that, straightforward, like it was a decision I could make and simply hadn't. I turned to look at him. "You don't understand," I said. "I know I don't. That's what I'm saying. Help me understand." "You can't understand it unless you've grown up in it. And Nadia, you think it's simple. You think caring what they think is a choice I keep making. It's not a choice. It's the first thing I learned to do. It's wired in. You can't just turn it off because someone suggests you should." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "I hear that. Do you? I'm trying to." We had to learn, in that period, how to argue without either of us disappearing. I had a habit of going very quiet when I was genuinely upset. Not strategic silence, just a kind of emotional shutdown where the words stopped being accessible. He had a habit of wanting to solve things quickly, which sometimes meant he offered conclusions before I'd finished arriving at the problem. We had to keep showing each other where the edges were. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and we kept choosing it. After 8 months, we decided to get married. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. There wasn't a proposal in the cinematic sense. We were sitting in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, both reading, both tired from a long week, and he said, "I think we should get married." I looked up. "I think so too," I said. We sat with that for a minute. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. And that was it. I texted my mother that evening. Simple, no preamble. "Elias and I have decided to get married." No response for 2 hours. Then, "We need to talk." Within 24 hours, the infrastructure of opposition assembled itself with an efficiency that was almost impressive. Relatives called, family friends called. People I hadn't spoken to in over a year suddenly had urgent things to say about my choices. My mother alternated between crying and not responding. My father was silent in a way that had weight to it. And from all of them, in various forms, the same sentence: "You're choosing him over your family." I gave the same response every time. I never had to choose until you made choosing necessary. Then Samira called. She used her careful voice. "Congratulations," she said. "Thank you. I want to talk when you're ready." I sat with that text after we hung up. Congratulations was the right word. I want to talk felt measured. When you're ready felt, underneath the consideration, like a countdown. But she was my sister. She loved me. I told myself I was looking for problems that weren't there. I wanted to believe that. I think that wanting was what she was counting on. 3 weeks later, Samira and I had lunch. She was warm. She asked about the internship, about the wedding planning, about how I was settling into the flat. She laughed at something I said. She reached across the table and held my hand at one point and said, "I've missed you." And then she said, almost gently, "Are you sure you're not rushing?" I took my hand back. "We've been together 4 years. I know. I just mean, are you sure you've thought about everything?" "What, everything?" "Just, you've been through a lot this year. You left home. You started over. You're finishing your degree. That's enormous. I just wonder if this is the right time to also be planning a wedding." "Samira, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying, take a breath. Give yourself a year. Discover yourself properly first. I looked at her across the table. I know myself, I said. She smiled. The smile was sad and certain, in a way that meant she had already decided she knew better. I went home, and I thought about that lunch for a long time, because something about it bothered me. Not the content exactly. Overprotective concern from family was not new. What bothered me was the phrasing, the discover yourself, the take a year, the are you sure you're not rushing. I had heard those exact phrases before. From Maya, 2 weeks earlier. I had not thought about it at the time. But now I was thinking about it, and the more I thought, the less I could attribute it to coincidence. I called Maya. "Did my sister talk to you?" I said. A pause. The pause was long enough to be an answer. "What? No! Maya!" Why would your sister talk to me? I don't know. Did she? Nadia, you're being paranoid. But something in her voice had shifted. A tightness. The careful quality of someone choosing their words with more attention than the conversation seemed to warrant. I let it go, for the moment. Then, 1 week later, I was looking for a screenshot in my message history, something from a venue Elias and I had looked at, and I went into my archive searching. And I found a thread. Samira. Messaging someone whose contact I didn't recognize. The thread was short. I had only the fragment I could see in preview because the messages were from an old device backup that had partially synced. 2 lines visible. "Did you talk to her?" And then, "Make sure she doesn't know we talked." I read those lines 4 times. Then I went back through the previous 3 months of my life, and I started looking at everything differently. I arrived at Maya's door without calling ahead. She opened it, took 1 look at my face, and I watched something move across her expression. Guilt, recognition, and then the particular sadness of someone who knows they are about to have a conversation they have been dreading. "Come in," she said. We sat at her kitchen table. "Tell me," I said. She looked at her hands. She began with, "I thought I was helping," which is something people say when they know that what they did caused harm and haven't found a better way to frame it yet. She told me that Samira had contacted her. 3 months ago, that Samira had expressed concern about me, that I was isolating myself, that the relationship was affecting my judgment, that I couldn't see it because I was too close to it, that Samira was worried. "She showed me things," Maya said. "What things?" "Screenshots. Of arguments. Things you'd apparently sent her." I went very still. I never sent Samira screenshots of my arguments. Maya looked up. "She said you did." "Maya," I held her gaze. "I have never in my life sent my sister screenshots of a private argument. Not once." The color changed slightly in Maya's face. "She said you'd shared them with her when you were upset," she said. But her voice had shifted, less certain now, recalibrating. "What was in them?" I said. "Arguments. Between you and Elias. One of them looked like... You seemed really distressed. You were saying he wasn't listening to you, that you felt unheard. There was one where you said..." Maya stopped. "Where I said what?" "Where you went silent mid-argument and didn't respond for a long time. That pause, that single, specific pause. That was in the screenshot," I said. "Yes." I thought about the argument. I remembered it. It had been a difficult night. I had shut down mid-conversation the way I did when I was overwhelmed, and we had talked about it afterward, worked through it. A private moment, an imperfect moment, a moment that belonged to Elias and me, and nobody else. "How did she get that?" I said, quietly. More to myself than to Maya, but I was already building the answer. Elias's phone. 9 months ago. Samira's battery had died at a family gathering, the last one I attended before I left. She had asked to borrow Elias's phone to make a call. He had handed it to her. 4 minutes, maybe 5. I had not thought about it then. I was thinking about it now with a clarity that made my chest feel like something cold had been poured into it. She had not made the call she said she needed to make, or she had made it and also done something else. She had gone through his message history. She had found our arguments. She had taken the screenshots she needed. Then she had taken those screenshots, evidence collected from a phone she borrowed for 5 minutes, and built a narrative. She had gone to Maya and said, "I have proof." She had framed herself as a worried sister rather than a woman who had deliberately gone through someone's private messages to find ammunition. And Maya, who loved me, who wanted to help me, had believed her. "She lied to you," I said. Maya was quiet for a long time. "I think she believed what she told me," she said finally. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," Maya said, "it doesn't." I drove home. I sat in my flat. I started going through everything I could access: old message previews, email fragments, a conversation log I hadn't looked at in months. And I found something I hadn't been looking for. Samira had messaged Elias. Directly. 6 months ago. I read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. She had messaged him with the presentation of a concerned sister-in-law-to-be. She had told him she was worried about me, that I was struggling with the separation from my family more than I was letting on, that I was carrying more pain than I was admitting, that she thought he should think, carefully, about whether the relationship was adding to my burden rather than reducing it. And then, and this is the sentence that made my hands stop being entirely steady, she had said, "If you really love her, you might consider whether giving her space is the kindest thing you can do." She had tried to convince Elias to end our relationship. From the inside. 6 months ago. He had not told me. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. He said hello. I said, "Did my sister message you 6 months ago, asking you to break up with me?" A very long silence. "Yes," he said. "And you didn't tell me. Nadia, you didn't tell me. I know. Why?" He exhaled. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the way it was when he was being precise about something. "Because I knew if I told you, you would have confronted her. And there was still a part of you that was trying to hold something together with your family. Something you hadn't let go of yet, and I thought if I told you, you'd blow up the whole thing before you were ready to. That wasn't your decision to make. I know. You had no right to make that decision for me. I know. Elias, I needed to know that. I know, Nadia. I know. I was wrong. I was trying to protect something I could see you still needed, and I went about it the wrong way, and I'm sorry." I sat with that for a moment. For several moments. The thing about Elias, the thing that was both the most difficult and the most true about him, was that he was rarely dishonest, which meant when he made a mistake, it was usually because he was trying to do something real and misjudging the method rather than the intention. He had seen something in me I hadn't fully admitted yet, that underneath all of it, underneath the defiance and the survival and the lockers and the leaving, I still wanted my family. I still wanted it to be fixable. I hadn't been ready to burn that down, and he had known it before I did. He was right about what I needed. He was wrong about what I had the right to know. Both things were true simultaneously, and I would have to sit with that complexity for weeks before I could fully untangle it. "We're going to talk about this properly," I said. "Yes, but not right now, okay? Right now, I need you to know what's happening." And I told him about the phone, the screenshots, Maya, the message thread I'd found, the intervention that, as of that conversation, I had begun to realize was not a spontaneous expression of family concern, but something that had been constructed, piece by piece, over months. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" And that question, that specific question, was the reason. That was why I had chosen him. Not because he was perfect, not because he never got it wrong, but because when things were at their hardest, his first move was to ask what I needed, rather than tell me what to do. "I need to go talk to my family," I said. "Okay. I need to go back into that room. I know. And I need to know that whatever happens, I'm not going to come out of it having lost you." "Nadia," he said, and his voice was completely steady. "You're not going to lose me." I went back. I drove back to my parents' house on a Thursday evening. I had not told them I was coming. I had not told Samira. I had not told Maya. I parked outside. I sat in the car for approximately 4 minutes. Then I went in and found every person from the opening of this story already assembled in the living room, with the green armchair moved to face the sofa, and my mother's red eyes, and Maya staring at the floor. Samira had known I was coming, which meant she had been monitoring me in ways I still haven't fully mapped, and rather than let me arrive and have a private conversation, she had assembled the entire apparatus of the intervention in advance. She had needed it to happen on her terms. I walked in. I set my bag down. I sat in the chair that had clearly been positioned for me, and I let Samira speak. She was thorough. She had prepared well. She presented the screenshots, on her phone, passed around the room so everyone could see evidence of my emotional instability, of arguments in my relationship, of moments where I had said things in the middle of conflict that, out of context, looked like distress signals. She had a timeline. She had testimony. People in that room had stories, impressions, concerns they'd been saving for this moment. She ended with, "We just want you to see what everyone else sees." I looked around the room. My mother, holding a tissue. My father, finally looking at me rather than the window. 2 relatives with expressions of sincere and misdirected concern. 2 family friends who should not have been there. And Maya, who had still not looked up from the floor. "Can I say something?" I said. Nobody told me not to. Did anyone in this room ask me if I was happy? Silence. Did anyone call me, not to tell me what they'd decided about my life, but to ask me how I actually was? More silence. Did anyone think that the starting point for being worried about someone should be a conversation with that person? I looked at my mother. She was crying again. I felt the pull of it, the deep, old, powerful pull of wanting to fix my mother's pain. I had been feeling that pull my entire life. I had made decisions based on it for years. I held myself still. I looked at Samira. "You messaged Elias," I said. The room shifted. "You messaged him 6 months ago and asked him to leave me. You told him, if he loved me, he'd give me space." I kept my voice even. "You borrowed his phone for 4 minutes and went through his messages and took screenshots of private arguments. You went to my best friend and told her I had sent you those screenshots, which was a lie, and you used them to build a case against my relationship, so that when this moment came, you'd have evidence." Samira didn't move. "You've been building this," I said, "for 2 years." My father's face had changed. He was looking at Samira now. My mother said, "Samira?" Samira said nothing for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. The careful structure of it had cracked. "I was trying to protect you," she said. "From what? From making a mistake you couldn't take back. The way you define mistake," I said slowly, "is marrying someone I love and building my own life. That's the mistake you're protecting me from." "That's not." "Then what is it? Explain it to me. Explain it to all of us." She went quiet. And then something happened that I wasn't prepared for, even though I thought I had prepared for everything. Samira sat down. She sat down in the way people sit when they have been standing on something for a long time and can't stand on it anymore. "Do you remember," she said, "when I was 24? I waited. I had a job offer. In another city, a good one. I'd been working toward it for 2 years. I looked at her. I hadn't known about this. I didn't tell you," she said, reading my expression. "You were 15. Nobody talked about it. She paused. Mama cried for 2 weeks when I mentioned it. Baba said daughters don't move away from their families unless something is wrong with them. The extended family said I was being selfish, being ungrateful, being something they had a long list of words for. She looked at her hands. I turned it down. The room was very quiet. I stayed. I told myself I was choosing my family. I told myself I was being the good daughter. I built a story about it that made it feel like a decision I'd made, rather than a wall I'd walked into. She paused. And then I watched you. I watched you leave. I watched you study and work, and build a life and maintain a relationship. I watched you do all the things I told myself weren't possible. Her voice had gone very flat, the flatness of something that had been held under pressure for a long time. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself if I intervened now, you'd be grateful later. That I was giving you something I wished someone had given me. And? I said. She looked up at me. And I think I was punishing you, she said, for having the courage I didn't. I sat with that. My mother made a sound. My father was very still. I sat with it for a long time, because it deserved to be sat with, because it was the truest thing Samira had said in 2 years, and it had cost her something real to say it, and I was not going to diminish that by responding too quickly. What she had done was real. The harm was real. The 2 years were real. The screenshots, the messages, the intervention, the network she had built to manage my life, all of it was real, and saying it came from pain didn't make it into something else. But I understood it. Not forgave. Understood. And understanding it, just understanding it, separating her action from her motive, seeing the wounded person operating inside the harmful plan, that was the thing that let me breathe. I looked at my mother. I never chose Elias over my family, I said. She was crying. I kept going. I chose myself. That's what I did. I chose the version of my life where I could breathe, and I wanted both. I wanted Elias. I wanted my family. I wanted my career. I wanted to come back to this house and eat your food and argue about small things and be known by the people who have known me the longest. I looked at my father. You were the ones who made me choose, and then you called it my fault for choosing. I picked up my bag. I'm going to go now, I said. I'm not leaving the family. I'm not making a declaration. I'm going home. I looked at Samira. We're not finished, I said, but we're not continuing it here. I walked out. Nobody said don't come back. That was different from the last time. That felt, I thought, like something beginning rather than something ending. 6 months later, I submitted my thesis on a Friday morning. I had been working on the final chapter until 2:30 the night before, and I arrived at the architecture building at 7 a.m. to print and bind it before the submission window opened. Elias was outside when I arrived. He had brought coffee. He handed it to me and said, "I'll wait out here." He knew I'd want to be alone for the submission itself. He knew exactly which moments I needed company in, and which moments I needed to be the only person in the room with what I'd built. That is what I mean when I say he knew me. Not perfectly, specifically. Maya apologized. It took her 3 weeks. When she finally came to it, she sat across from me at our regular cafe table. Terrible lighting, same corner, same 2 cups. And she said, "I convinced myself I was being a good friend. I was being a coward. I'm sorry." I told her she had 1 chance. She took it. Samira and I speak now, slowly, in the careful way of people rebuilding something after a structural failure, not pretending the cracks aren't there, not tearing the whole thing down, just working with what remains and finding out what it can hold. I don't know yet what it will become. Something different from what it was, possibly something better. That's still being written. My parents came to the wedding. My mother cried in the way she cried at things she was actually glad about, not grief crying, but the kind that comes when emotion exceeds what a face can contain. My father walked me in. Before we reached the door, he stopped. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, quietly, in the way he said things he meant, "You look like yourself." 2 words more than he needed to say. 2 words that were everything. Later, when the evening was winding down and the hall was emptying, and Elias and I were sitting in the quiet that falls after a long day, finally exhales, he asked me, "Do you regret any of it?" I thought about the locker, the key on the kitchen table, the car pulling away from my street, the phone ringing for 4 days, the intervention room, the green armchair, Maya's face, Samira's voice going flat and honest for the first time in 2 years, my father's window watching, the pause in the middle of that argument that became evidence, the book about collapsed buildings left on my desk by a man who understood that the best comfort is sometimes proof that other things have also fallen down. "No," I said. "Even everything it cost?" I looked at him. "Especially everything it cost, because now I know exactly what I chose and what it was worth. I know it, not because someone told me. I know it because I lived it." He didn't say anything. He knew me well enough to know that was a complete sentence. I spent years thinking that independence was a form of abandonment, that to leave was to betray, that to want your own life was to declare war on the people who loved you, that loving someone and belonging to them were the same thing. They are not the same thing. Loving someone is not the same as belonging to them. And belonging to yourself, fully, without apology, without needing permission, is not something you owe anyone an explanation for. I didn't choose a man over my family. I chose a life where I didn't have to choose. It cost me things I still grieve. I would pay it again. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Afro Storyverse for more stories like this one. Real, complicated, human stories that don't let you go. Hit the like button, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and follow Afro Storyverse so you never miss what comes next. This is Afro Storyverse. We tell stories that matter, and we'll see you in the next one.